Jim Sorenson is a world-renowned entrepreneur, business leader, and social innovator. He serves as chairman of Sorenson Impact Fund, which funds sustainable, scalable endeavors that maximize positive impact on lives and societies they touch. Jim is also the founding partner of Catalyst Opportunity Funds. He served Sorenson endowed the Sorenson Impact Center at the University of Utah, but much more importantly, he serves on the National Advisory Board at Utah Valley University. He is an entrepreneur, was instrumental in developing several new industry categories, including digital compression software that helped users in the online multimedia revolution at Sorenson Media. Oh, and he's transformed the capabilities and opportunities for millions of deaf and hard of hearing individuals through Sorenson Communications. In just a minute, I'll introduce him, I'll invite him to the stage, but again, for those of you who are viewing away, you notice I'm not wearing a mask. I'll put one on. Mr. Sorenson will not wear one when he comes up because no one's sitting within 6 feet of us. We hope you're all staying healthy and safe, and with that, we'll introduce Jim Sorenson.
Thank you. Is my mic working okay?
Your mic is being picked up by them, and
okay.
The other ones, yeah, you're working.
If I'm working, great, great. Well, it's great to be here. I have to say this is really kind of a unique experience for me. Not that I haven't spoken to public meetings and groups like this, but I've never really spoken to this many garbage bags. And I suppose it's a sign of the times.
You're not referring to our student body. You might
No,
clarify that.
Not referring to any of the live bodies, but I'm going to do this if you don't mind, because I've got to keep this for the records. All right. But I would also say that this is the first time that I've spoken live for about a year, less than a year. And the previous year, I had about 50 speaking engagements all around the world. So that tells you what 2020, that's a good encapsulation of 2020. And I was just talking to Norm here, and we're still trying to figure out when we're going to be able to get our advisory board back together, which we really sorely need to do, and we miss the interaction. But I really want to thank all of the brave souls that came here today, and hopefully the time that we have in the next few minutes will be worth your time. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my personal experience. And this experience is all around what I've been doing for about the last 2 decades. It's going to be about my journey into impact investing. And I don't know if you know what impact investing is. I suspect that you do. But for those of you that may not be familiar with it, impact investing is investing in businesses that produce both a financial return and an intentional, measurable, purposeful social impact. So there's really 2 bottom lines when you're looking at impact investing. One is the financial return, and the other is the social impact. So it's really doing good while doing well. And it's really something that has caught on, and I think was kind of a quiet revolution that is really caught on in the financial marketplace today, and I've been involved in that for about 2 decades. So a little bit about impact investing, and I'm going to start this off by telling you what the challenge is. In 2015, the UN developed what are called the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And these goals were intended to lift people out of poverty around the world by the year 2030. And they established 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, for that purpose. And they encompassed everything from clean water to sanitation to access to education, healthcare, climate, so forth. There are 17 of them, and they estimated that it would require about $3.5 trillion to invest globally in helping the world to attain kind of the base level of these sustainable development goals. Now that's a pretty big task when you think about it, particularly when all of philanthropy is about $300 billion in 2019. And so really something needs to happen, and I don't think you can rely on governments or philanthropy to be able to address the world's problems. And so I think that's really where the hope is today. And you'll see that as we talk a little bit more about impact investing. In fact, social innovator Sir Ronald Cohen declared about impact investing, he said, "The impact revolution promises to be as far-reaching in disruptive innovation as the high-tech one before it, which he notes has transformed our lives completely in 3 decades." And I believe that, having worked in this over the last couple of decades. So a little bit about my journey. For as long as I remember, philanthropy relied on kind of the same old model, which was you make your money over here and you give it away over here, and none the twain should ever meet. And I think there's kind of a limitation to that, and that is that I think it lacks the accountability and the transparency that you have in the traditional financial markets, and it's not really very efficient, not at least much of the time. And my family, I think, was really kind of a perfect example of this. My father was a very successful entrepreneur. He was pretty renowned for the businesses that he founded and the jobs that he created. I mean, did a lot of really great good in the world. My mother, on the other hand, was very empathetic. She really taught us strong core values, and she really felt for the little guy or the underdog, and would spend her time and energies in helping people. And so this was really a good cross-section for me to grow up in, and I hope that it's qualities from both my mom and dad that I'm utilizing in building up impact investing. My journey in impact investing really began in the early 2000s, and this was a time of tremendous heady growth in the tech, the broadband businesses and convergence. It was what everyone was talking about. Valuations became very high, and in 2002 there was essentially the dot-com bubble burst. Some of you in the room remember that, where valuations for companies plummeted, and the VC world was pretty shocked, and they weren't investing in anything. And it was right at that juncture that I had developed a business all around video conferencing to the mass market. And we were at a stage where we had a fairly healthy burn rate, and we had investors that were interested, now were not interested, and we had to decide what were we going to do with this company. And I had hired a deaf brother-in-law a few years before, thinking that this technology may have an application for the deaf. And it was right at that junction that he came to me with a new service that was being trialed for the deaf called Video Relay Service, VRS. And what that enabled was the deaf to communicate with the hearing through the internet with a remote sign language interpreter in real time. And because of the technology that we developed, we were in a great position to provide a much better experience for the deaf. So I had to make the decision, do I close this company, or do I take the big bet and focus on this very niche market, the deaf community? And I made that decision, and it became a real remarkable experience because the company grew dramatically within 3 years, became the largest private equity transaction in the state of Utah at that time, $1 billion exit, and it had happened in such a short period of time. But the most profound thing about that experience was that this radically changed the capabilities of this underserved community, the deaf community. And I'm told enabled them to be about 4 times more employable in the marketplace because now they could essentially compete with their hearing peers in being able to communicate. And the company, I think, also employed over 10,000 people, and many of them were deaf. So this was a real aha moment for me that you could develop a business that could benefit society. And because it was a business, it was much more scalable and self-sustaining than a typical top-down government approach or philanthropy. And it was able to reach millions of people in a relatively short period of time. It was able to also access capital outside of philanthropy and the federal government. So this led me on the path. I thought there's really something happening here, and there's got to be opportunity with other sectors, other problems in the world, other geographies in the world. And so I started looking and really started promoting this idea of helping to facilitate it and learning more about it and building the field. Now this was before impact investing, that term, was ever coined. So let's talk a little bit about impact investing. I think one of the unique aspects is that it's really a spectrum. So in the traditional financial world, you're investing for alpha. I mean, that's all you're interested in. And that's all on the far end of the spectrum there. With impact, you can invest and give concessionary, on a concessionary basis, to help de-risk investments, or even with grant money to help promote impact investing. And you can blend it with more traditional capital in a very innovative capital stack that would enable you to leverage in traditional investors alongside impact investors or philanthropy. So it's really a spectrum. So let's talk a little bit about the state where we're at today with impact investing. Currently, and we looked at this in 2020, so these numbers are fairly recent. I think they're conservative numbers, but if you looked at just by comparison the total federal outlay, we're a little less than $3 trillion in federal dollars, and about 22.4 trillion investors, institutional investors, and private foundations. Now these are strategic grants. These are grants that I would say are focused on very strategic initiatives, about 75 billion during that year. And there's been about 715 billion invested in impact investments in 2020. And that's up over 40%, about 42% from 2019. So, and these are very thematic investments. By thematic, I mean they're purpose first, they're measurable, and they're not just negative screens like ESG. I think ESG is also, and I don't know how many of you know what ESG stands for. ESG stands for environmental, sustainable, and responsible investing. So you can imagine the themes around environmental and mental investing, sustainability, and socially responsible investing. That's been around for a longer period of time, and that's grown to 12 trillion under management from 8.7 in 2016. So this gives you kind of a little bit of a ramp for what's happening here. So when I talk about a quiet revolution, this really is a quiet revolution that I think many people may not be aware of, but many and most, particularly in the financial world, are waking up to. And it is growing at a very dramatic rate. And why is it growing? It's growing really, one of the main reasons is for the people that are in this room. Most of the people in this room represent the demographic that this really resonates with. That is those that want to invest, that want to spend their time in doing things and investing in things that are consistent with their values. The millennials, the X-Gens, and women, in the surveys that have been done, 70% are motivated to want to invest with their values. So this is a demand driver for now, but particularly for the future, when it's been estimated by many that as much as 40 trillion in wealth transfer will occur to these generations. I think with that, you see now the mainstream players developing products, developing services, intermediaries setting up advisories to be able to address the demand. So these are very notable names that have all developed platforms or funds or services to address the opportunity within impact investing. So I think one of the interesting things is to really look at, how effective is impact investing? I mean, are you giving up return? Are you giving up anything for social impact? And I think there are a number of studies, and in my own experience, that would tell me that you don't have to do that. Now remember, it's the spectrum. So certainly you can invest catalytic money in higher risk endeavors that may not be comparable to the traditional marketplace, but you can find risk-adjusted returns that are focused on social impact. And studies have shown lower costs of capital, better operational performance, and better stock performance in the public markets that are measuring and investing for impact and ESG. So this really brings me to, I think, our foundation, the Sorenson Impact Foundation, and really my philosophy and our philosophy on philanthropy. And I would call it catalytic philanthropy. And I think if I were to give a simple explanation of that, it's where the impact is much greater than the donation. And the more catalytic it is, the greater the impact. So that's what we look for when we decide how to deploy our donations. How catalytic is it in generating impact? And by catalytic, it means it's got to be collaborative with others that may be partners or either leveraging in other capital or generating through innovation social impact. So that means we need to think differently. We need to think strategically. That means we collaborate, we look for innovation, we look for things that are market-based, and most importantly, that can become self-sustaining and scalable and with high impact. So a little bit of a history about the Sorenson Impact Foundation. It was founded in 2012. So I'd had this great experience with Sorenson Communications. I'd really learned about impact investing. I was participating in it and felt like there really needed to be something philanthropically that supported, sustained, and helped in the very early stages what I would call the pioneering gap that many social entrepreneurs face, They call it the Valley of Death because it's so hard to get capital at that very early stage. And really that was the genesis for the Sorenson Impact Foundation. And the model was really to take this philosophy and to help educate the world and help to demonstrate through example how impact investing could be successful. And we have really 3 different strategies that we deploy for that. We have grants, and you know what grants are. And we're committing to advancing grants and deploying grants that particularly are very strategic and focused on key initiatives that we define each year. We have what are called program-related investments, and that's really kind of a legal term or a tax term for an investment that a foundation can make that's considered a grant, so long as it's purpose first and that the substantial reason for doing it is not for financial gain. It doesn't mean you can't participate in financial gain, but that's not the main reason you're doing it. And this is really to enable some of this very early stage capital that's very high risk that may be used to de-risk new businesses that are generating high social impact. And then of course mission-related investments. This is now dealing with the corpus of the foundation, and these are investments that are consistent with the purposes of the foundation. So a little bit about our grant program. This is our 2020 grant program. We looked at what the needs were in the community and the marketplace, and we came up with really, I think, 3 things that we really wanted to focus on. We wanted to focus on equitable access to wealth creation through entrepreneurship. So that was really helping entrepreneurs, particularly more equitably. Those were entrepreneurs in the communities where entrepreneurism is on a downward trend, and in populations or racial areas that entrepreneurship is lacking. Black entrepreneurs, people of color. We really wanted to help those entrepreneurs. We wanted to also invest or provide grant capital to help unlock capital for community investment in these areas. And then we also felt that given COVID and really the tremendous problem in the workforce, that workforce development was a huge area for us. I've talked a little bit about program-related investments, so I'm not going to go into that other than to say that we generally make about, I would say, with our capital about 60% to 70% in program-related investments to the 30 to 40% that we make in donations. We feel like these businesses and social entrepreneurs are so important, and you'll see that as we give examples. So a little bit about the impact. I'm not going to go through these numbers, but you can see just the growth between 2018 and 2019. I'm told in 2020 we're now reaching over 200 million people in impact that are being impacted around the world. These enterprises are growing. They are self-sustaining, becoming self-sustaining, and growing their impact through all of the areas that we are involved in, from education to healthcare to poverty to livelihoods to clean water and sanitation. 16 of the 17 SDGs that I talked about we're addressing. And that brings me really now to the corpus. We undertook in 2016 the decision to align all of the investments within the corpus of the foundation to mission-related investments. That's a big task because these investments need to be risk-adjusted, alpha-seeking returns in order for the foundation to be perpetual. And we embarked on that, and I could spend a little bit of time here, but I'm not, because I want to be able to cover everything today. We have, at the end of last year, achieved 100% of the corpus being aligned in mission-related investments. And those investments are invested in all of the 17 SDGs that have been targeted by the UN. I think what's remarkable about them is that 73% of the firms that we've invested in, or the managers that we invested in, are firms that are led by people of color or women. 73%. These are market rate funds. Now this is in contrast to the typical traditional investment world, where this would be under 10 in terms of the percentage. And 73% of these investments are targeted very thematically to the low income or bottom of the pyramid populations. I think even more remarkable, and this is I think a very important bottom line, is that we're beating our benchmarks this year by over 15% during the year of COVID. We're beating the traditional investment markets. And since the inception, we're up over 9%. So it again, showing that you can generate social impact and obtain very competitive, outperform the market really financially with impact investing. So a little bit about the Sorenson Impact Center. I'm not going to put too much time here other than to say I felt the need for the next generation to be involved in this, because the next generation is what's going to really make this happen. And for that reason, endowed the Sorenson Impact Center at the University of Utah, which also, by the way, works with other universities. We have students in the center from BYU, from Utah State University. We should have from UVU. They're all invited. But the whole purpose is to give students an experiential education in impact investing. And what does that look like? It looks like really real-world experience where you're helping to source investments, social entrepreneurs and enterprises, where you're doing the due diligence, the market research, and the investment and underwriting, and then pitching to experienced investment committees your work and your investment thesis, and then actually watching to see whether or not an investment is made, and then ultimately what happens with that investment over time. It's experience in working in the areas of data science and in field building. We have over about 200 alumni, and you can see that we've grown from around 25 students in 2015 to where in 2020 we had over 100 students participating in the program. And that's a really interesting experience, because obviously they're working in teams, they're working safely virtually in larger groups, and we have been able to pull that off, I think, during this period of pandemic, and to grow it as dramatically as you've seen. So a little bit about the work that's been done there. Number of countries we worked in, the students that have been mentored, the organizations that we've worked with, and the investments, over 70 investments. I took a group to see Warren Buffett. He's not doing this anymore, but it was quite an experience. But this was his quote: "If this were around while I was in school, I'd still be in school." Finally, I'll just end up with the involvement with policy. I think one of the other areas I've been very much involved in is at the state and federal level on advocating for policies that are consistent with impact investing and enable the government to provide incentives to investors to invest for impact. And I think we've had really great success in the last few years. The Opportunity Zone legislation, which I'll talk a little bit about, was passed with the tax reform in 2017. The CIPRA Act was passed in 2018. That provides an incentive for the federal government to invest alongside social investors on pay-for-success initiatives. That is, evidence-based, social, contracts that are based on outcomes, not just on outputs. On the BUILD Act, which was established a U.S. Development Finance Corporation for investing in the rest of the world for impact. The Opportunity Zones is something I've been very much involved in with Catalyst, a fund that I formed last year. And we've raised and invested about $150 million during this year of pandemic in distressed zones that governors have designated across the country, 8,700 distressed zones. And these are zones where, adults with diplomas, much higher percentage without diplomas, much higher poverty rates, much higher unemployment, vacancy, median income. These are really distressed areas. This incentive was designed for that, and these are where these investments are helping these communities to be able to turn around. I don't know that I'll spend much more time other than to say I think there's a great opportunity in impact investing. There's a great need for the skills that you learn here in school, and a great impact that you can make on the world. And with that, I'd like to just cue this up. This is an example of just a couple of the impact investments that were made by the foundation.
Liberia had an 80% unemployment rate, an 80% poverty rate. About 40% of children were in school.
South Central Los Angeles probably has one of the most notorious histories of any city in the entire country.
People generally thought, you're a good, successful kid and you live a very, very nice life. Why do you want to go to Liberia? Do you know what it's going to be like there? It was always really clear to me that I wanted to just go see for myself. Liberia was probably home to one of the most brutal West African civil wars that we've ever seen. And that lasted, some people say for 14 years, some people say even longer. I'd luckily gotten this training in finance and in accounting and in marketing, so I thought, well, what if I could lend that to these women as a way of helping to lift their families out of poverty?
Well, I grew up in West Africa. I came here when I was 18. I had very little money, but I've been in the U.S. since that time. I was very fortunate I got a full scholarship to go to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Northern Nigeria today is overrun by a lot of really difficult situations. And what I really saw firsthand was what fatalistic thinking, the lack of education, and the lack of opportunity lead to. They lead to very bad outcomes. That backdrop really informed me that I wanted to spend my time ensuring that people from all types of backgrounds had access to opportunity, had access to education, had access to just an ability to move forward in their lives. I realized quickly that other investors were not investing in these tougher neighborhoods. Having grown up in Nigeria, I looked around and what is everybody making a big whoop about? This is like the suburbs. That's what really initially led me to
does it have to look like this? I see a bunch of beautiful people, hardworking people, artists, musicians, people who want to become entrepreneurs, people who have the wherewithal and the intellect to get there, but not necessarily the capital to get there.
The Sorenson Impact Foundation was founded to bridge these gaps with catalytic capital. Launched by impact investing pioneer Jim Sorenson, the foundation understood that achieving profound impact demands a profoundly different approach to philanthropy, one that embraces risk. From its outset, the foundation invested in early-stage impact startups that had the potential to make an outsized positive difference.
I said, well, I have an idea. All the kids are at school in Liberia. All of them need school uniforms to go back to school. Why don't we become a school uniform producer and sell them to the people in Liberia? The women humored me for a second and said, good idea, boss, but we can't afford school uniforms for our kids. How's the rest of the country gonna afford them right now? In a moment of almost desperation and ideation, I was like, well, what if we just gave the uniforms away? The women said, okay, and how do we pay for that? And I said, well, there is this thing in America called the one-for-one model, and I think we could probably do something like that to pay for uniforms. We put the project on Kickstarter. In the first 5 hours, we sold $50,000 worth of t-shirts and then another 170 off of Kickstarter in pre-sales. And so pretty much had what we needed to start the business. And through that, we're able to put 8,000 kids in school last year. Liberia doesn't have a 40% enrollment rate because parents don't want their kids to go to school. Parents desperately want their kids to go to school. They just can't afford it. 98% of the children of the women in this factory were in school. So we think the best way to make sure kids go to school is make sure their moms have a job.
My central investment thesis was very simple, which was even in tough areas, the vast majority of people are good, hardworking people that want a safe place for their kids. My view was that if you give them a really good product, a really first-class apartment with amenities and a sense of home and a sense of luxury, they would take care of that property, they would treat it as home, they would pay rent, and they would be great tenants. And so that was the way that I initially started investing in South LA.
SOLA is a social impact real estate fund, but it's not your typical fund. We really are on the ground with the tenants, and there are story after stories of triumph, story after story of perseverance, and it really boils down to someone believing in them, someone giving them a chance, and giving them opportunity. There are plenty of times that I've cried with the tenants as they're telling their stories, because we sit down with every single tenant and we want to get a sense of who they are, what their aspirations are, what their backgrounds are, where they are financially, where they are educationally, and so we can help them attain those goals that they have individually. It resonates big time with all of us when we sit down and hear these stories, and it's just keeps us going. It's the fuel for the fire, really.
A lot of investors and a lot of individuals believe that you can either have strong social returns and social impact, or you can have very strong financial performance. And in their minds, those are somewhat mutually exclusive. We believed that you could have great financial returns, market-like returns, and still deliver incredible social impact. And in fact, that doing good led to better returns. And we have dozens of examples where doing the right thing and doing well by the community led to better financial performance.
The results have been remarkable. In just 5 years, the foundation has impacted over 200 million lives, 75% of which live in low-income communities.
One of the best parts of this business and my job has been getting to build it in partnership with Jim Sorenson. He is an amazing optimist. And I think that that is why somebody having a crazy idea, like we're going to manufacture stuff in Liberia where essentially nothing is manufactured and sold, and we're going to use that as a way to lift hundreds and someday thousands of women out of poverty, that stuck with him. He actually could see it, he bought into it, and as we've gone through crazy experiences, they always figured out a way of saying, let's stop, pivot, and what's our next step?
The foundation knew there was more to be done, and in 2017 decided to put its endowment where its mouth is, to mobilize both its grant capital and its corpus to catalyze impact. The foundation is now 100% mission aligned. Every dollar that the foundation invests is an impact. Through these bold efforts, the foundation has supported companies that are improving equity for women and people of color, enhancing clean energy solutions, improving education and healthcare outcomes, and building affordable housing.
Between Fund 1, our first fund, and our second fund, we have owned and operate about 1,500 units. 98% of our tenants are minorities, 2/3 of our tenants are low income, and 1 in 3 of our place tenants has been homeless at some point in their lives. We have been very successful and have a track record in providing affordable housing.
The fact that we are doing ground up work and adding to the stock of affordable housing, historically we've been doing rehabs, but now we're doing a lot of ground up, and this fund allows us to do a lot more. That is very exciting because we are able to make a big dent in this homeless epidemic here in Los Angeles. So I look at where we'll be 10 years from now, and I see Sola's legacy. I'm hoping that we could look back and say that we were at the forefront of making this incredible impact and change in affordable housing, and we were the pioneers in that fight.
Since starting the mission alignment process, we have outperformed various market rate benchmarks. The foundation understands that its largest impact will be made by engaging an array of sectors to leverage capital for social good. Ultimately, the foundation is proving that with innovative finance and bold collaboration, no global challenge is insurmountable. Join us in moving mountains.
Well, I hope you got a little bit of a feel for what we do at the foundation. You know, I know that we live in kind of a divided world right now, and I think that impact investing offers a pathway for both those on the right and the left to get together. And I believe that there's a real bright future in what I'd call, you know, the free enterprise for impact that is represented in impact investing. And I'm very thankful to be here today. I'll entertain any questions you have. We have a few minutes now. So the question is, what impact was the pandemic to our foundation? Well, I think the impact to the foundation, particularly on the program-related investment side and on the grant making, it really focused us to, I think, 3 major areas. And we initially looked at the portfolio of companies that we had to determine what their financial health was and how they were impacted. But we looked at those that were right in the front of the response for impact investing. These were companies that were primarily involved in healthcare or the delivery of goods or services to people. And we're talking globally. We're not talking about just here in the United States. Those that were focused with the treatment of individuals. And that was kind of the first phase, and what was the health of those companies, and did they need further investment, did they need support? Then beyond that, we looked at the recovery phase and the companies that were really quite involved in the recovery, and then ultimately the third phase was resilience. And I think that the bottom line is that the companies have survived well. The social entrepreneurs are very nimble and able to adjust. And we didn't lose one company during this period of very turbulent economic turmoil. And in many cases, the companies really outgrew what they had planned to do. So I think this coming year, we're going to focus again more on underserved communities as it relates to their economic development and areas that have higher unemployment rates and higher vulnerability to the effects of the pandemic. So the question is, as an aspiring social entrepreneur or impact practitioner, what advice might I give? I think what the education that you're getting here is really key. And the students that we see are able to utilize, whether it's in finance, whether it's in accounting, whether it's in IT, the knowledge that they learn, the skills that they learn, and particularly the networks, and ultimately program them for impact. So we have students that ultimately go out and either work for entrepreneurial companies that are involved in impact, some that are working for funds, some that are working for foundations, and there are a lot of opportunities out there in this space. So I would just look at building your networks, look at developing the skills and abilities that you're going to be able to put to use in this space. So the question is, the previous administration really promoted opportunity zones. Where do they stand going forward with the new? And I think the previous administration really came on board with opportunity zones. I think the initial data and the work on the Hill in getting it passed was really very bipartisan. When you look at it, Cory Booker and Tim Scott on the Senate side were very much involved. And frankly, Speaker Ryan really, he listed it as one of the three biggest accomplishments of his time in office. So I think the fact that it's bipartisan is what is the secret sauce to the continuity of the program. I think there are improvements that can be made. I'd like to see data and measurement of impact so that investments are they're kind of measured. That was something that was not in the final legislation that was passed. I think that's likely to happen with the new administration. I think there'll be some tweaking, but I think definitely the program is here to stay. Over $75 billion was deployed in the first year, and we see a tremendous demand, and there's really the right way to do this, and we think that Catalyst is a good example of that. I think that's it. I'm sorry, I meant to have a little more time for questions, but thank you so much.
We only paid for 50 minutes of his time, but the president has a question, so we'll go into extra innings. Go ahead, President.
I think it would, and I think that the center, the University Venture Fund could help with the curriculum or even with deal flow. So, and the vice versa. So wouldn't it be nice if the Wolverine had a deal that could be done at the same time, the due diligence at the University of Utah, the University Venture Fund. So I think there are great ways to collaborate, and I would welcome if there was a desire to push this and move it towards the first fund at the university was not impact. This was before really impact investing had been coined, but then with the center coming to front, the next fund, the follow-on fund, is focused on impact. So we had a similar journey to what you could have here, if there was a real interest in that here at UVU.
I guess as the president, we'll talk with you more about that.
Okay.